Welcome. Today's post is Waco and April 4th. Published on April 10, 2023. November 17, 2019. First COVID-19 case identified. On the same day was Hong Kong police siege with 1,300 arrests. This was the final missing puzzle piece necessary for me to understand everything going on today. And I don't just mean this year, or just the USA. I mean everything going on in every country since November of 2019. This should be exciting. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button, and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts, and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. Just before his arrest, on April 4, 2023, Trump held the first rally of his 2024 presidential campaign at Waco, Texas. He held it 17 miles away from a place famous for where 17 children were burned to death by a cult in 1993 when negotiations failed. Interesting choice. Waco was a 51-day police siege that ended with a cult burning themselves to death rather than surrender to arrest. Images from Waco documentary. Police sieges like that are rare. Know when the most recent one was? November 17, 2019. First COVID-19 case. November 17, 2019. Hong Kong police siege 1,300 arrests. Waco was the missing puzzle piece necessary for me to understand everything going on today. I don't mean this year, or just the USA, I mean everything going on in every country since November of 2019. Things are about to get much more clear. The Waco siege officially began when 4 ATF agents were murdered as they tried to arrest a brainwashing child predator and his top men. 6 cult members were killed the first day, leading to a 51-day police siege that ended in tragedy. 04/04. On April 4, 2023, Donald John Trump surrendered to authorities in New York. This is the first time a US president has ever been subject to anything like this. I had a long-standing countdown from my Twitter on April 4. March 27, 2020, equals Q highlights, 4, Fed takeover. Plus 4. March 31, 2020, equals end of Trump's 15 days COVID plan. Plus 4. April 4, 2020, equals Marine countdown ends. Plus 4. April 8, 2020, equals military plus Starlink live fire drone/missile shootdown. Plus 4. April 12, 2020, Palm Sunday Easter Sunday equals Harvest Week. The countdown began in the middle of 2019, which means it wasn't just plus 4 days but plus 4 years. I never could have imagined it was that far planned in advance. At the time I couldn't wrap my head around timescales that long, but now it's easy to swallow as we are at an end. But what are we at the end of? Writing Redemption when Trump was indicted. Given to her on her 44th birthday, of the storm, same day Trump returned to social media after being banished. What has really been going on? How do you justify things to come? What would have happened if Trump had pulled the trigger on mass arrests? Mass riots? How can this be avoided? What is the ideal position for Trump to be in given what has to come next? Part of the answer is exactly what we see. Consider the charges. Reconcile the actual results. I will be decoding Waco as the post continues, but the quick answer on how it connects is the following. Waco, COVID and Hong Kong. November 17, 2019. First COVID-19 case. November 17, 2019. Hong Kong police siege 1,300 arrests. The wiki list of famous police sieges. Notice Waco and the most recent one being the one, coincidentally, happened the same day COVID began. Notice right before this what change happened in government. Bypassing Hong Kong legislature October 2019. Before I found this connection I had already decoded COVID in relation to Waco, so this was confirmation. Confirmation of what? A COVID refresher. October 18, 2019. Bill Gates Global Coronavirus Simulation. October 18, 2019, Wuhan, China Military World Games begins. Plus 30 days. November 17, 2019, Wuhan, China COVID first appears. November 17, 2019, most recent police siege begins. Keep in mind the Wuhan Military Games represent 110 different nations. So for the entire world spreading COVID to be timed precisely to the world participating military games, 100 plus nations, at the exact same place COVID began is a clue as to what is really going on here. I already decoded in several posts how COVID is the method chosen for a global military operation to track/arrest. Notice the early articles talking about how everyone infected is under medical surveillance. Learning a Waco-like police siege happened in China on the first day of COVID clarifies things greatly. Here's another set of comms I've gone over. These tweets from the CIA/NSA were just before the World Military Games. NSA talks about getting paid sick leave. The same thing COVID brought to the world. Consider that in conjunction with the other messages about PSL adapted to the next threat. Now we can understand this symbolism in retrospect, but what specifically were they referring to at the time? Lightning striking PGA Tour Championship leaving 6 people who sought shelter under a tree injured. Shelter equals Hong Kong. Reconcile with Hong Kong extradition. Notice also the error with lightning spelled lightning. August 24, 2019, Masters tourney lightning removing shelter for 66. Plus 10 days. September 3, 2018, Hong Kong, plus 15 hours ahead, leader Carrie Lam withdraws extradition bill. September 3, 2018, Boris Johnson loses control. Symbol of rioting and political control forcing the hand of military to go the COVID route. This begs the question of what's going on this week as the April 4 comms hit. April 7, 2023. Masters tourney 3 trees fall beside 17th tee box. August 24, 2019, Masters tourney lightning removing shelter for 66. Plus 10 days. September 3, 2018, Hong Kong, plus 15 hours ahead, leader Carrie Lam withdraws extradition bill. Time will tell what this one means. If it's like last time, then it means in the near future protection is ending for certain parties. Legal protection. This fits with the Waco connection I've been going through, that anyone not flipped by now has run out of time. Final battle 17 miles from Waco. Officially COVID-19 is called that because it looks like a crown and the rest is as follows. Corona plus virus plus disease plus 2019. But no other famous virus/disease in the top lists include the year, and I believe including it here is invoking Waco. I believe the 19 is meant to symbolize the tragedy at the end of Waco on April 19. Not only did the end result in a mass death of kids, but it also became a rally for terrorism that resulted in the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19 the following year. The point is in avoiding it. COVID was a way to diffuse hostage situations, Waco, around the world. It had to be global, and that's why every major military in the world got together to see it through. This in turn allowed the pursuit of real criminal justice for the first time in history. This pursuit is coordinated with comms. Note the day before COVID hit, Q posted about hunters becoming the hunted. The 1-year anniversary of the military games, leap year, had Q link a video, "I'm gonna bring this whole diseased corrupt temple down." Trump at Waco states criminals are allowed to kill without retribution, but this is going to change, and the deep state will be obliterated. I don't need to decode that, but I do need to decode Waco, as it's the only way the full scope of what's been going on now and into the future will become clear. Waco, WTC bombing, and Batman. An important connection. February 26, 1993, World Trade Center bombing. February 28, 1993, Waco siege begins, 4 ATF killed, 6 cult deaths. I believe Waco was, in part, a reaction to this bombing. Trying to shut down the largest cells ASAP before more terrorists are activated. Why was the WTC constantly targeted? April 30, 1939, WTC origin at World's Fair, New York. March 30, 1939, Batman debut in Detective Comics, dated May. May 1939, Batman comic dated. Batman made his debut at the same time, WTC being gathering of wealthy business people just like the star of Batman. Companies use sports to coordinate ops, which is interesting to consider here. Notice the fair at that time was promoted by pro baseball Batmen. Given how sports are used to coordinate the larger scale actions of companies, this helps clarify the stated kinds of motive. Batman is literally a Bat-man, and his focus on not holding a gun is tied likely to the distinction of this not being police or military but specifically business power. Furthermore, WTC as a business symbol is tied to the comms of Batman. The ops that manifested from companies banding together in the WTC is the symbol of Batman. The actual symbolism of Batman appears to represent companies banding together like in WTC, literally that's what it existed for, and coordinating on larger goals like criminal justice. Yes, both things. WTC equals Batman, actual structure where business is done, baseball equals Batman, broadcast messaging to coordinate action. It's obvious why this would be something criminals would target in this context, as it's a way to bully companies, which in turn applies pressure to the entire country as they form the foundation. Even so, they don't bomb arbitrarily. It's almost always a reaction, and I believe WTC bombing was, in part, a reaction to hiring Janet Reno as Attorney General. February 26, 1993, WTC bombing 9 a.m. February 26, 1993, Janet Reno nominated. February 28, 1993, Waco siege begins. March 10, 1993, Janet Reno vote reported by Joe Biden. Her role in calling the shots on Waco as she came into power during it is famous. Why would Janet Reno cause a reaction? The short answer is I believe it represented a new criminal justice push, but understanding why this specific push caused a reaction requires much more historical context than the other points. One thing I'll note right away is she replaced Bill Barr, Trump's Attorney General. She also died exactly one day before Trump was elected. I believe that specific point was a message that may make more sense later in the post. That's not the only familiar name involved in Waco either. A man named Kavanaugh, pronounced the same as Judge Kavanaugh, was the star ATF negotiator early on. Under Kavanaugh, a large number of terrorists switched sides rather than killing themselves along with their hostages as the final ones did. The Kavanaugh most know today began around the same time as well. I believe the point of bringing in Kavanaugh by Trump was in invoking the early successful Waco with flips rather than hostages being sacrificed. This point seems a stretch. Until we get into the deeper meaning of Waco. Example, the cult members that took the deal. Notice the description. You don't realize forces are carving out your path in life. This is a comms-aware man explaining how terrorists are created. How can that be reconciled if he was a terrorist? Did he learn comms afterwards? The answer to that will become clear as we go, and it will clarify a lot in how these kinds of shows are put on. He is a drummer in relation to the guitar player, strings. Where is the keyboardist? Oh, that'd be the other cult member that escaped. Kathy Schroeder, same name as a character extremely popular in 1993 and synonymous with a toy piano. The female, Mighty Men, leader of the cult. Guitar, drums and keyboard. Famously gave lots of intel about the living conditions inside. Had her big moment reuniting with Child as flipped March 12, 1993, same exact day Janet Reno, famously mannish and played by men in most parodies, gets job as AG. This doesn't mean Waco was fake, only that some of the events were used to send comms. Remember that the leader of the cult was a serial child predator. I believe there were a few comms-aware people involved and some of them were flipped through what Janet Reno represented. He had electronic equipment as in child predator operations broadcast. Child predators have strings and there are people above those strings. Understanding why Janet Reno would change things requires understanding the changing landscape of 1993. Understanding the relationship between the Bush and Clinton side in 1993 is crucial for everything going on in the bigger picture. Bush lost and the logistics of handing over the USA is not as simple as one man moving into a White House. Bush lost because his support collapsed, and as best I can tell it collapsed due to threats/murders. At a certain point, Bush's side accepted the election as lost and a peace deal was made. The deal included cooperation to go after killers like Waco. His support collapsing explains how a third-party candidate could encroach on the dominant Republican performance from 1980–1988. A large section of Bush's side threw in the hat for Ross Perot splitting the vote. The support that collapsed was the side tied to Murdoch, which would eventually become Fox News. February 20, 1992, Premier League top splits away from the Football League for lucrative TV rights from Murdoch's Sky. February 20, 1992, Perot announced on King his presidential campaign. Clinton was a beneficiary of bad times for Bush, but that does not make him responsible. The nature of cell-based ops makes it almost impossible to know who is who and plotting what. This is why a deal was made to fix this problem for all sides to protect everyone. Bodyguard is one such comm. Most popular soundtrack of all time and released same month as the election. If I should stay I would only be in your way, so I'll go. Notice lines in the film about how Reagan and JFK got shot, and the bodyguard replies that it wasn't on his watch. Now just because Clinton was distancing himself from that side does not mean he was wholly independent of it. This is the point of switching Bill Barr for Janet Reno. Just as it was time to the Waco cult breaking up, so too was there an agreement for people who had formerly cooperated with the cult to turn against them. Hence Janet Reno getting her job, and it was time to the first leader leaving the cult. A mighty man, woman leaving to be with her son. The kinds of intel provided is the same kind one would have if they spied on a home from a surveillance monitor. This is perhaps why before the collapse David Koresh owned a Camaro. Camaro survived is a comm I've gone over as symbolism for people watching MK Ops, surveillance of targets. April 14, 16/1993 Walker, Texas Bush attempted assassination by Iraq. April 19, 1993, Waco siege ends. April 20, 1993, Joe Montana traded to Kansas. April 21, 1993, Walker Texas Ranger debut. Walker Bush Texas President. Walker plus Texas plus Crime Show. I go over some of the deal made to surrender the White House to Clinton here. 1993 Rudy elected mayor of New York. 1993 Walker Texas Ranger begins. 1994 Walker Bush elected Gov of Texas, landslide. 2001 Rudy Giuliani leaves office. 2001 Walker Texas Ranger ends run. First episode, One Riot, One Ranger. Starring Chuck Norris is a reference to a famous statue in Texas modeled after a man named Jay Banks, who as a ranger personally brought down a murderer Mad Dog killer named Norris. Digging deeper into this, Banks, Texas hero ranger, I find he was born right after the Titanic sank. Born within a day of the first reports of Titanic, first mate Murdoch, married to Banks, and his hero dog that helped rescue people in danger with warnings. This is important because Titanic was sunk to create the Federal Reserve Bank. There were a host of comms threatening people and forcing them to flip, as I've gone over. Like lifesavers, the 1912 mint that saves your life from boating accidents if you accept it. The bank. So while this could be coincidence, I suspect the symbol is in protecting loved ones from tragedies. 1898, Nabisco. 1898, Wreck of Titan, Titanic ship sinking story, ship identical to Titanic. 1908, Titanic ordered. 1908, Oreo predecessor Hydrox. 1912 March, Oreo launched. 1912 April, Titanic sinks. These kinds of comms are long set up, but even if you know comms, the odds of you knowing the particular nuclear code to disarm a warhead that will kill thousands is slim. J. Symbolism is for umbrella and protection. J. Banks. J. Symbolism is for umbrella and protection. J. Banks. Murdoch was first mate, died on the Titanic and married to Banks, another death, ducked out rather than get killed, but his dog rescued people from Titanic sinking. This may unlock the root of Murdoch symbolism. Waco being ground zero for creating psychopaths that cause tragedies like Titanic and plane crashes. Flipping people away from that life and gaining cooperation was the goal. People who could identify threats and spy on them. Symbolism of a keyboard. Spying using technology. Note the message. They will not find David's bones. He is alive. Skeleton equals framework of operation. Skeleton comms equals the structure of a large organization. Bones equals symbolism of people/cells that weren't identified and remain at large. Keep the cult leader as the body symbolism in mind for this next one. I covered Janet Reno, but there was a bigger date for flipping than that. March 21, 1993, biggest flip of Waco. Rita Riddle and 6 others agreeing to leave, strategy is working. What comms hit during this timeframe? Keep that last comm of the cult leader's body symbolism in mind. March 18, 1993, Seinfeld Jr. mint, money printing, dropped inside body of dying artist allows them to survive but with now worthless art. March 21, 1993, biggest flip date of cult members. March 24, 1993, Shoemaker Comet. The Seinfeld connection probably makes little sense if you are new here, so let me go through it as this is educational. Episode involved trying to identify the name that rhymes with a female sexual organ. Blackmail. The point is sending messaging to the cells they don't know about, as a large point of the ops is in keeping cells hidden, hence the plot trying to remember the name of a woman. It rhyming with a part of the female anatomy being a message to ask people involved that know them to give up information on them. Seinfeld was the biggest show of its type and that makes it important comms, and as such, the introduction. July 4, 1989, Reagan bucked off a horse. July 5, 1989, Seinfeld debut. Likely represented Mossad moving away from the Bush/Reagan camp. This explains the sudden plummet of popularity leading to the loss in 1992. Waco tragedy appears to have occurred due to a rejection of the deal to flip. Officially this is the story as after they got the first people out it was right off to jail. This hardened the remaining terrorists against doing the same. Instead of trying to negotiate more surrenders they use a show of force and crush his car and break the compound. The goal in modern times was to prevent a 419 with the Davidians. COVID-19 invokes this. The goal was to do this time what worked rather than what didn't. Kavanaugh worked in the original Waco, but they replaced the teams and the rest died. I suspect the threat of arrests is what flipped the ones that left, and then they were forced to follow through with the remaining. As in all the agitation tactics that followed which served only to detonate the situation. The ones that didn't flip, they began playing music and sounds to distress those inside. A message with various comms tied to what has just happened as pressure. Rabbit killed, plane flying away, door slamming shut, phone off hook, are all symbols of their associates leaving them behind. Their associates are an important point to decode, the ones that left. Keep in mind the various levels of what happened in Waco. The keyboard/computer symbol leaving. Which side would this imply? Keep in mind the various levels of what happened in Waco. The drummer for example. February 11, 1969, Nixon announces war on crime to confiscate mafia assets traced to criminal activity. February 13, 1969, drummer Waco siege born. February 13, 1969, siege of Allen/Allen building in Durham threats to burn records if police act. So you can see cause and effect. Nixon say he is going to confiscate mafia assets, and we get this sudden reaction telling them if he tries they will burn it all. The ones that flipped on the other hand help explain the sudden shift in comms from pro to anti-riot. Specifically things like video games and the sudden moral panic to address violence in them. I mention Harvester because October 1, 1996. Harvester/Cult of the Harvest Moon, failure in sales involves MK Mortal Kombat spine rip as central plot point. August 9, 1996. Harvest Moon famously non-combat RPG SNES leads to long-running series. Symbol of which direction? No fighting versus hyper-violence. Waco being broadcast was a message sent to the many cells around the world. To stop pointing that gun at our heads, or we will take action. This idea of demanding the Davidians to stop pointing a gun at his people. Symbolism of removing the MK elements. That's the symbolism of raising terrorists in America, pointing a gun at the other side. And Waco was the culmination of it all. Taco Girl, taco is a shell symbolism. Same symbol used by McAfee. Shells being people that won't be traced back to them that can act as necessary. The bones that won't be found, that is. This escalation that happened after negotiation for flips ended, is the same stage we are in now. It's what caused the tragedy. But unlike then, far more attempts have been made today to defuse it before it becomes an issue. The most recent issue of the most popular manga in Japan, for example, had a line that invoked this. Context being a violent pirate in a shark ship about to murder innocent people. Being told as they are destroyed that if you point a gun at someone, prepare to be ended. That could be coincidence, but something that I'm confident isn't a coincidence is the history of Street Fighter in relation to Mortal Kombat. I mentioned Mortal Kombat used as an example of hyper-violence. It is a game that originated as the competitor to Street Fighter II. Define Street Fighter. Rolling Stones, Street Fighting Man, lyrics, the time is right for fighting in the street, boy. August 1968. Street Fighting Man released Rolling Stone Street Fighter Riot song. August 23, 1968. DNC Riots. A song that tells listeners to go out in the streets and fight, and it was released exactly as that was happening. Radio banned. Note the art used and the introduction. Note the art used and the introduction in the most popular fighting game of all time. Intro involves a white man beating up a black man in front of an all-white crowd. Neither character is in the game itself, just the opening cinematic. What happened around the release of the game? February 6, 1991, Street Fighter Arcade released. March 3, 1991, Rodney King is beaten by 4 white police officers on videotape. April 5, 1992. LA riots triggered from acquittal of Rodney King officers. June 10, 1992, Street Fighter II released on home consoles. Rolling Stones, Street Fighting Man, lyrics, the time is right for fighting in the street, boy. Street Fighter symbolism was initially tied to ops that promoted it. This was a force in removing H.W. Bush. Something Clinton was beneficiary of. This was pre-Waco. I believe several game companies were among those flipped, and one of them was Capcom. As a result, their other big franchise Rock Man/Mega Man ended up being a good cipher that explains what happened. A relationship between company and cell. Mega Man/Rock and Roll. Many important movie/game comms are often accompanied by a song that becomes famous alongside it. That's the second game, and famously both with Mega Man and Street Fighter, it's the second game where each title exploded in popularity. They both started the same year, and I believe they were intended to be connected symbols. Street Fighter revolutionized the fighting game genre, and Mega Man introduced the first level select, creating the first nonlinear mission-based game. Anyway, accolades aside, the first part to understand for comms here is a doctor converting a boy into a fighting robot. This is symbolism of programming, an MK symbol. The bad box art is part of why the first game sold poorly. A story you will hear in any retrospective you are likely to read. A famous story of overcoming failure to make something everyone adores, but that is itself a comm. The story of it is tied to Mega Man 2's unique development. That it was to be developed only on the free time of the developers in between other projects and done in only 4 months. By itself this tells us little, but when we reconcile other famous parts of the history. For example, the legendarily bad MS-DOS Mega Man games. Just like Mega Man 2, it was a game developed in between other projects and had no connection to anything they had been working on. The point is symbolism in MKing on your free time in between other projects. Local groups programming a child coordinate a network of abuse, and this clarifies contributions of temporary affiliates. If that's confusing, the way South Park uses Mega Man comms will clear it up. It's an episode focused on the son of Satan visiting and juxtaposed with Cartman trying to get a set of Mega Man action figures for his birthday, one from each friend. The threat of not bringing a Mega Man means not going and getting his mother's pie. Pi equals pi as in 3.14, a coded op symbolism as well as something meant to be thrown to ridicule. Note Homer takes notes in Clown College on throwing pies, that he is to kill. The point with Cartman is in making fun of him, and that is coordinated. This is his mother's pie. All a plot against me, he says. A plan laid out by the handler of the boy to further abuse and program. This allows a ride on the Ferris wheel, a symbol of moving up. The end lesson learned is that if you abuse the abused kid, then you become well liked. The first season isn't where they focused on good morals. But it is a good lesson for the methodology of MKing. The story concludes with Cartman having a psychotic break over something that had been built up to a fever pitch with him. Note the episode ends with his mother asking him if he wants to have more pie. I go more into South Park comms in this post. With that South Park context in mind of kids spitting in bullied kids' eyes as a game in relation to Mega Man. Consider the origin of Mega Man tied to contests where fans design the enemies. Best designs become the bosses for the next game. Now I did say Capcom likely flipped around Waco, and this is what I meant by that. The next big transition for Mega Man came after Waco 8 months later and involved a new Series X. Mega Man X's story involved going into hibernation for 100 years as he was taught good morality. A way to communicate to handlers to deactivate an MK that was at risk, and go in the other direction. This doesn't mean cells would accept it, but it does mean one supporter shifted positions away from cutting down big plants. The original hero was a tree-cutting robot. First game involves Antarctica exploration robot. Another symbol giving a clue on Mega Man comms is his cannon firing lemons, which is a common term for a dud car. Given the symbolism tied to driving is often used in relation to MK subjects. Moreover, the lemons transform into a comet when charged. The charging mechanic became synonymous with Mega Man. They changed the comet shape to a more generic one, but when decoding it's crucial to pay attention to the origins. That comet shape was intentional just as the lemons are. I've heard both described that way in multiple documentaries about Mega Man. Comet symbolism is groups of people coming together for ops. Symbol of turning a lemon into something to drive with enough people and time. The bad US box art also has a story. Outsourced to a friend and done within 6 hours without looking at source material. Just like getting friends involved with the network. Doesn't have to look pretty, just has to get done quick. Notice the sequel also had inexplicable art, showing it was intentional. The art makes no sense in context of the game, but like with many inexplicable choices in the series, there is a purpose to it. We can't always know what that purpose is. I do find this curious though. That they skipped Mega Man 2 and went straight to 3 for the legendarily bad Mega Man DOS games. The act of reskinning another game tied to nuclear waste makes me think it's about picking up abandoned targets from other people, but that's a real shot in the dark there. Anyway, let's consider a few other media pieces around the time of Waco. Ruby Ridge, Party of 5, Land Mines. I went over before how they flipped a number of people inside the cult. People who would then transition from cooperating with insurgents to giving information they had. The fact she is described as giving intel on living conditions is a symbol for monitoring people. Cameron Park Zoo opens right after Waco. Camera on same guy as the original MK driver, Allen Memorial Hospital. Symbol of watching. Breakout performance Jennifer Love Hewitt born in Waco, Texas in a famous role right after the Waco siege. What are the odds the only Waco-born actress that came up in my searches just so happened to get famous the year after Waco? Meaning the show had its production start likely right after Waco ended. I didn't watch this show enough to properly decode it, but I can make some small conclusions from the basic descriptions. A plot about orphans after parents are killed due to driving, symbolism of what? June 4, 1968, Scott Wolf Party of 5 Waco show born. June 4, 05/1968 Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy during the Poor People's Campaign. July 14, 15/1966 Richard Speck rapes and kills 8 nurses in a Chicago dormitory. July 14, 1966, Matthew Chandler Fox born. Note the two main characters are both born on a day a tragedy begins. RFK murder plus serial killer. Technically the assassination happens at midnight and that's actually a part of the comms. Both of these people were born right at the last possible moment to stop a tragedy. RFK died at minutes past midnight, and in the case of Richard Speck the 8 deaths occur over 2 days, so both symbols imply stopping something tragic. In addition, this is a show about at-risk teens that just lost their parents. Symbolism of taking over the role of caretaker for dangerous people. This is post the flip of various MK cells. Some of these connections are a lot stronger than others. Can't be sure until a strong pattern emerges, though due to my history I know some things are more connected than others to MK. For example, this go-kart connection is a shot in the dark, but I mention it because it was the only recreation they mentioned I heard. Some of these connections are a lot stronger than others. Can't be sure until a strong pattern emerges. It is clear though that monitoring of dangerous people became paramount. A tragedy that didn't need to happen is how it's remembered. South Park had an episode tied to it. About helping the police by giving surveillance tapes of MK households to confirm it's not a dangerous cult. Though even when the media supports monitoring it doesn't mean every cell follows suit. August 21, 1992, Ruby Ridge standoff, Waco precursor. October 1992, international campaign to ban landmines begins. June 12, 1997, Princess Diana landmine speech, signs of a change of heart. June 13, 1997, Timothy McVeigh recommendation of death sentence. I've talked before how landmines are used to symbolize sleeper MK ops waiting to be stepped on. So this just reinforces that. Ruby Ridge is important to go through. As you can see, there aren't that many famous police sieges, and this was not only the one directly before Waco, it was the first one in America since the 1970s. In 1995 a deadly train saboteur put both Ruby Ridge and Waco as motives. Timothy McVeigh also had both as motives for the Oklahoma City bombing. The point being these two events were widely viewed as connected. The connection being these were places children were being prepared to be used as terrorists. Pay attention to the biography of the victims, and it becomes more clear. The first being the dog. A yellow lab named Stryker. Lab equals laboratory. This leads to the 14-year-old child's death as he retaliates for the dog's death. White supremacist homeschooling to child and forbidding graven images, like TV, as they stockpiled weapons. Just like Waco, the cutoff from civilization allows indoctrination of kids. The 14-year-old in particular reacting to the death of the family dog, I suspect is a code for the handler, which was the real target of the siege. This led to a child being sent after those responsible, leading to the tragedy. In Waco and Ruby Ridge both sides had deaths. I can't always be sure where the comms begin relative to the literal retelling of events. One thing I can be sure of is either way the prospect of jail is what kept abusers from making deals. Lessons learned in handling these situations have surely been applied to today. especially in handling the press. I've used pop culture to decode quite a bit of Waco, and there is one symbol in particular. Another pop culture comm I believe is tied to Waco once again comes from One Piece. Pop culture East and West, Kimba and Simba. It's the most popular anime/manga of all time, so even though most readers here may have no interest in it, don't underestimate the importance of a comm from this level of popularity. The comm I'm referring to is a child trafficker that pretends to be a messenger of God. It's not hard to draw a parallel. Not just the same name, but the same ideal with a religious front brainwashing children and a founder that presents themselves as a messenger of God. Sound familiar? Koresh presented himself as the second coming at Carmel, and in One Piece, Carmel performs miracles to prove God's favor. All done to manipulate a position where they can obtain and sell children in plain sight. Hiding in plain sight. Sell children to who? The world government, which is where this becomes educational. The methodology of adopting children abandoned by parents and then feeding their bad habits and then selling them to the world government. In the One Piece world, this character is responsible for creating the world view of the most evil female pirate in the world. She does this by ignoring, forgiving, and even encouraging bad habits. Done in such a way that a bystander can't quite tell just how much manipulation is going on. Ops made to traumatize an individual to create a desired perspective that is able to act immorally without restraint. This gives us a perfect analogy of Mount Carmel and MK Ops in general. Why does MK happen after all? Who is funding it all? In some cases it's someone trying to take over a territory and using threats of violence to do it. In Cyberpunk, a terrorist takes over your body due to the project of a rich son of a massive corporation trying to take over his father's empire. This leads to the father dying by the son's hand as you watch from inside the wall, having just taken his brainwashing technology. Symbol of him using the player, which in this game is an MK symbol, to kill the father. Multiply that corrupt megacorporation by 1000x, and you have the current landscape and the foundations of the world government. Not a perfect answer. In some cases funding comes from foreign countries trying to weaken a country from the inside. When Congress gives aid to these countries, they may end up funding our own destruction. This dynamic may be represented in Nannygate. The 2 AG nominations before Janet Reno failed due to employing illegal immigrants. A message perhaps for cutting off a feeding tube to terrorists. This is just a hypothesis, but it's a good place to start. Note one of these 2 AGs has a curious name given the timetable. Kimba, this was in 1993 as Simba, the Lion King, which took inspiration from the Japanese Kimba, was finishing development. Kimba was the breakout success of the father of all manga and anime. Remember that certain Japan cells flipped during Waco. So funding of actors trying to destroy us appears to represent the USA being the backbone in the Japanese economy. The problem being a number of prominent cells there cooperating with bad actors. At least prior to 1993 anyway. This makes the Lion King story, which involves an evil uncle trying to take over the empire using sociopath hyenas, a little more clear as to the meaning. It also begs the question of the original symbol invoked by Kimba. I might decode that in a future post. Tezuka invented manga/anime through Astro Boy. I've discussed this in a few posts. Backstory of being built by a parent but then abandoned and sold to the circus. December 31, 1962. Match game premiere, the highest ratings in its time slot throughout run. Plus 1 day. January 1, 1963. Astro Boy highest rated Japan anime begins. Note the comment on the 5+ million video about Astro Boy and Mega Man relating viewing it to getting put on a child predator watch list. The match gained connection because of blackmailing and cooperating with Japan for filming/storage. Backstory of being built by a parent but then abandoned and sold to the circus, the underwear-only circus, CIA, sold Robot Boy was likely the symbol of cooperation. The success of manga birthing an entire industry is no accident and represented the Rothschild, world government or as close as you are likely to get, promoting the property in exchange for the cooperation internationally. The inspiration for Astro Boy came from Disney, so that strongly reinforces that connection if you've read any of my Disney posts. Over time the cooperation grew and made Japan the second biggest economy from 1968. Until China overtook them decades later. This helps explain why Japan began to lag and China rose. Next one is almost certainly a coincidence, but it's one of those that has a tiny chance of being the right connection, and just in case I want to remind myself of it if future patterns bear it out. October 6, 1965, Kimba the White Lion, said to be inspiration for Simba. October 6, 1965, Ruben Sierra, India the Cat Origin, born. January 4, 2009, India, President's cat named after Ruben Sierra dead, in DIA. January 20, 2009, Obama inauguration. But what is less likely to be a coincidence is this one. The accusation that took down Roman Polanski took place during the 1977 police siege. I suspect this was a counteraction. As in, they knew the accusation was coming and so tried to give them cold feet as to what they could unleash. Could be coincidence, but these things are connected to blackmail. Roman Polanski was royalty in Hollywood and tied to both murder/blackmail like no other figure I know of. Keep in mind I'm not always right. Some of these like the Kimba and Cat connection and the go-karts are little more than interesting potential connections that need further digging, but others are solid. Develop critical thinking, and you'll always know when I'm giving hypothesis versus strong decode. Hypotheses are important. You don't discover patterns of 20 without starting with the first. Final thoughts. I covered quite a few tangents, so I want to remind you of the most important connections of the post. I began the post discussing Trump and Waco. Specifically in relation to the larger picture with Waco as a famous police siege. The most recent police siege, coincidentally, happened the same exact day COVID began. The discovery that Waco symbolism is tied to COVID is hard to express how important that is. November 17, 2019, first COVID-19 case. November 17, 2019, Hong Kong police siege 1,300 arrests. All of it began due to the stalemate reached with protesters, politicians and violence. Leading the military collab as just about every nation steps up efforts. October 18, 2019, Bill Gates Global Coronavirus Simulation. October 18, 2019, Wuhan China Military World Games begins. Plus 30 days. November 17, 2019, Wuhan China COVID first appears. November 17, 2019, most recent police siege begins. Defining the police siege/arrests as the origin point of COVID confirms many of my old decodes but gives us much more precision on the motives as we can see the comms that began it. Note also the Bill Gates simulation as his family is tied to the Federal Reserve Seattle branch. This is meaningful because the 0404 countdowns began with the Federal Reserve takeover. March 27, 2020, equals Q highlights, 4, Federal Reserve takeover. Plus 4. March 31, 2020, equals end of Trump's 15 days COVID plan. Plus 4. April 4, 2020, equals Marine countdown ends. Plus 4. April 8, 2020, equals military plus Starlink live fire drone/missile shootdown. Plus 4. April 12, 2020, Palm Sunday Easter Sunday equals Harvest Week. The countdown began in the middle of 2019 which made it plus 4 years. I never could have imagined it was that far planned in advance, and notice the very first plus 4 is about the COVID plan. I've said this in several posts, but the methodology used for getting things under control has been the wallets. Fed control plus squeezing thanks to the pandemic forced just about every major company to the table that wanted to survive. All of that over such a long period of time has led us to today. I don't know what comes next, but I'll keep trying to figure it out and share it. I have a microscopic reach, but given the nature of what I reveal, I'd be worried if it wasn't that way. Or worry that I had started accidentally promoting disinfo, because holy cow, does that have a history of trending. I feel strongly that people can handle this kind of stuff, but I understand why they have to be careful about this. I sometimes feel like I'm trying to lift the entire world, but I know it'll be lifted with or without me in time. It's not about me or any other person, it's about all of humanity. So getting the message right is crucial. I'm still just trying to figure out what that message even is, but I know people smarter than I am know it and have plans that are in motion as we speak. The best any of us can do is get ourselves as educated and healthy, body and mind, so that when the time comes we can help lighten the burden of lifting all of humanity out of darkness. Humans have so much potential waiting to be tapped into, and I can't wait to see what that looks like en masse. Return to the place we started, and know the place for the first time. Think about that quote for a while in relation to comms. How many things do you now know for the first time? Add up all the little things, and it adds up to a life we've lived. Yet without comms we can't ever know it, we are stuck on a river without a paddle being moved by the waves at their discretion. The idea of people making their own decisions for the first time in their life is something that excites me. A world where you walk down the street and rather than seeing people focused on their assigned tasks, they ask themselves what it is they want in this world and begin walking towards it. It excites me because it's part of my own story. Years ago I was frustrated and stuck in a bad situation. I could have stayed in that situation, and I'd still be miserable, but I took a leap of faith that things would work out if I did what I wanted to do rather than the path laid out before me. It took all of my courage, and failure meant death, but I realized something important. That if I died doing the thing I knew in my heart I wanted most, then I'd die happy. That realization freed me, and it shaped the entirety of what I have been ever since. Doing that allowed me to see the strings that had long suffocated me, but most people don't need nearly as traumatic a journey, lol. People need to understand the true nature of the world. Doing that will let them see what controls them, and they will grow. A growth that can only happen the first time you can actually see yourself in the mirror. Telegram chat. Join the Decoding Blog Telegram group. Begin decoding. Send leads. This has been Waco and 4/4.